Welcome to the Procurement Unplugged podcast, the podcast for procurement professionals. Great to have you with us today.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Procurement Unplugged. Today we have a very special guest, Michael Pleuger. Mike is a German procurement veteran. He has been in the procurement world for the last 20-25 years as a partner with KPMG and Roland Berger, and now as a procurement entrepreneur. Very welcome.
Thank you very much, Fabian. Thank you for your kind invitation.
So maybe it's interesting for our audience, how did you end up in procurement and how did you become a partner there? I mean, like most of the young people today, they all want to be a partner in a strategy consultant, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more how you made your partner track with a topic like procurement.
Yeah, certainly. I think like many of us, I ended up in procurement more as a coincidence. In parallel to studying business, I had a job in a procurement department in an MDAX company. They had hired me because they said there's a capacity constraint, a headcount bottleneck. So I was writing purchase orders and chasing deliveries. After a couple of days, I ran into the head of supply chain on the corridor, and he said, "Hey, young man, how do you like it?" And I said, "I like it, but you don't have a capacity constraint. You have an organizational problem." So he stopped smiling, invited me into his office for a coffee, and I shared my observations. And he asked me, "Can you fix it?" And I said, "I can certainly try." And I guess this is when the consultant in me was born. I continued in that role for a couple of years, and then when I've been working with consultants, they convinced me that the other side of the fence, the consulting business, would also be nice. So I joined E&Y in their strategic sourcing and e-procurement practice. And while everybody wanted to do strategic sourcing, I was struggling to understand what is so strategic about bundling demand and consolidating a supply base. I found the e-procurement space much more interesting because I could see how it's all connected, how things flow from demand to procurement, to suppliers, to finance, back to demand. And I did that for a couple of years. And at some stage, I was managing one of the largest SAP SRM programs globally for Deutsche Post DHL. And from there, I was headhunted into Vodafone. So I joined Vodafone's corporate procurement in Newbury. I was an e-supply chain manager, so it was my job to develop the digital procurement strategy and roadmap for Vodafone. Stayed on for 3.5 years, helped to launch the Vodafone procurement company in Luxembourg. But after that, I went back to Berlin, back to consulting primarily for personal reasons, joined KPMG, became a partner, senior partner, joined Roland Berger. And you asked, how do you become a partner? Selling. So ultimately, it's a numbers game. But I keep telling consultants they really need to have a focus, and they need to develop a core capability, because the core capability is needed at every stage of your career. It helps you getting trust of your team members when you are a project manager. It helps you getting trust of a client, being able to deliver the concepts and the change that you need. And ultimately, it helps you selling. So I think it's really a focus, specializing on a specific piece of content, and that can be anything. That can be procurement, as in my case. So nonetheless, we delivered award-winning innovation, and we got really excited about it. But at the same time, we also got frustrated because corporate governance is slowing down innovation at times. So, and ultimately, I left my corporate life behind and am a ProcureTech startup entrepreneur myself now, having launched Kiro Labs together with Detlef, Tim, and Christoph.
Super interesting journey. I mean, how did procurement, in your opinion, change over the last 20 years from when you first started to now when you started Akiro Labs? How has the landscape and the procurement industry changed?
I think in the very early days when I got involved, it was a completely different game. I mean, when trying to implement e-procurement, e-sourcing solutions, you struggled with master data, you struggled to get a purchase order out, you struggled to get a three-way matching right, you struggled to pay invoices. So it was really, really, really basics. Um, and many years later now, I think what we've seen in recent years is e-procurement is working seamlessly. You have different specialized solutions for different buying channels. You have all these specialized solutions on top of the P2P and S2C suites. So I'm thinking of negotiation capabilities, I'm thinking of sustainability solutions, I'm thinking of contract management solutions. So it's much more mature. What hasn't changed, I guess, is the ambition. Even in the early days, the story was always procurement is not an efficiency game per se. It is an effectiveness game, which basically means once you drive efficiency in procurement, you don't lay off people, but you dedicate the free capacity towards strategic tasks, because this is where the majority of the value contribution sits. But now, just having the capacity isn't helping either. What we see today is a capability gap in terms of strategic processes, methodologies, and toolkits. Procurement cannot achieve strategic benefits in isolation from the ivory tower. Procurement needs to work collaboratively with all the stakeholders in the organization. That is very often still missing, and leveraging the data and insights that is available for procurement. Procurement is the function with the most interfaces in the organization, the spider in the web. If we manage to leverage this position, we can be the primary provider of business insight and business foresight. And I guess recent black swan events like Corona, like the Ukraine war, like semiconductor shortage and all the rest of it, have really accelerated that. Procurement has been firefighting for the last couple of months. At the same time, people start appreciating that the answers to all these challenges is not continuous firefighting. It is much more strategic answers. And I guess that's how the procurement practice and the challenges have evolved over the last 20 years.
So basically, on one side, from the processes to the digitization of processes, and on the other side, from the operation to strategic thinking, kind of.
Absolutely. And I think what procurement needs to appreciate as well, when it wants to become more strategic, it needs to move more closely to the core business. And what procurement is all about is categories, right? Think of a Siemens. Siemens has an infrastructure business, they have healthcare, they have energy, they have, I don't know, in each of those businesses, they need steel. Now, flipping that around into steel from a procurement perspective is only giving you one thing: economies of scale and savings. But that's not necessarily what the business wants. The business wants, in one business unit, they want to drive efficiency, and procurement needs to help drive efficiency. In another business unit, they want faster time to market. They want to launch a new product, so procurement needs to enable this. And by thinking and acting in supply market dimensions like a category, procurement is putting itself into an ivory tower and is speaking a language that nobody else in the business is interested in. So we need to move beyond that category and start talking and acting in core business dimensions.
Then procurement functions as a value orchestrator between the stakeholders, the suppliers, and procurement itself, basically.
That could be an ambition, yes. by leveraging this unique positioning as the spider in the web. Nobody else has better access to stakeholders. Nobody has better access to data and information than procurement. And as such, we are the powerhouse of information and can truly orchestrate the entire value chain.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked now briefly about the development of procurement over the last 20 years and how it has evolved. What do you think were the biggest challenges within procurement teams you've seen in your customer projects in the last 10 years?
Well, I'd say what I've seen in my project, but also when you go back to the various white papers and studies that are out there from the different consulting companies, when you ask procurement professionals what is stopping you from delivering the full value potential, you very often hear early and continuous involvement with the stakeholders. So procurement is only involved once a technical specification has been finalized, once all the requirements have been determined, and sometimes even the suppliers have been selected by engineering or by production. And then procurement is only there to negotiate a couple of percentage savings. As a result of the late involvement, procurement is very often working with poorly specified demand, which is again impacting their ability to fully leverage the supply market. So the challenge, and I think I kind of said that with my previous answer, is to move closer to the core business, to be involved earlier, to bring in information about the supply market opportunities. If there's an emerging technology, how can that help us create more competition? If there are geopolitical events, how can procurement facilitate a trade-off decision-making that is benefiting the entire organization? And with that, I give you an example. If there's a lockdown in China, a corporate procurement guy in Europe or in the US might consider that as a risk. A local procurement person in Asia might think, fabulous, the global demand is gone, more for me at better prices. Or if a new technology emerges, procurement might consider that as an opportunity to drive more intense competition, while engineering and sales say, oh my God, that's risky. So procurement really needs to be the facilitator of all of this and enable the best possible trade-off decisions. So, for example, balancing profitability versus sustainability. Do we buy for a product that is highly profitable? Can we afford to pay into ESG targets? Or the other way around, do we have a reputational risk due to the supplier not fulfilling the standards? And no matter what it costs, this is what we have to fix first. And procurement can't do that on their own. So we need to orchestrate the entire organization to drive the best benefit from a total enterprise perspective.
And how can procurement be best equipped, or what's the solution or the toolkit to achieve that and to overcome those challenges?
I think the strategic procurement process, or even the category management process, if you will, is a nice vehicle to do so. I said we need to think beyond category, so we don't focus on the actual supply market dimension, but the process remains relevant because the process is analyzing demand. So you come across all the internal stakeholders, understanding what are their requirements, what are the technical specifications, how is our cash position, shall we rather buy or should we better lease stuff? We need to understand what is it that we're selling in the first place. Are we still selling machine? When you think of machinery companies, in the past they sold machines. Today they don't sell machines. They sell machine uptime, guaranteed outputs, service level agreements. So procurement needs to cater for services and spare parts along the components in order to really support the business model. So first process step is understanding demand. Then it's understanding supply, so doing market research and making sense out of the information that we find. Then we move into strategize. Strategize means we understand the strategic implications and we pull the most relevant value creation levers, and ultimately translating this into initiatives to realize the benefit. So the process is analyze, strategize, realize with the respective toolkits and supportive collaboration workflows that involve all the stakeholders in this process.
And with regards to toolkit, is it fair to say that from the kind of now process mindset, procurement really has to move towards digitization and digitize that process you've just outlined?
Yes, I guess that's the next step. As mentioned in the past, we have digitized all the transactional, the purchase to pay processes. We have digitalized the source to contract and individual process solutions for contracting or negotiation. And now it's time to start digitalizing the strategic procurement process. And going back to the initial discussion we had about consulting, I think at some stage in consulting, we realized that in the future, customers will no longer be willing to pay for busloads full of rookie consultants that analyze and conceptualize stuff for weeks and months and then produce a pile of paper. We anticipated that we need, as consultants, we needed to put our skills, our consulting skills, combined with the subject matter skills, in this case procurement skills, into a system enabling the customers to self-sufficiently run their strategic procurement process and projects. By that, the consultants are cannibalizing their core business, but at the same time, they are positioning themselves as the first go-to person for the customer. Because if the customer is using their system, he will always have questions along the process. And then the platform provider can deliver specific services, if it's a best practice, if it's a benchmark, if it's whatever piece of market intelligence. And so this skills to system approach is really helping to digitalize the strategic process. And that's not limited to procurement. It can be likewise a product development process. It can be a sustainability strategy. It can be a sales and marketing strategy with the respective tools. You just exchange some of the tools that are used, in the sense that for procurement, you need a supplier preferencing analysis, you need a Kreljic matrix. If you replace those with a BCG matrix, you're on the sales side already. So I think the next step in digitalization in general is moving forward to digitalizing strategy by providing a skills to system approach.
No, it's a very interesting thesis. You kind of disrupt the business model you've been working for so long, and find kind of the smart AI-driven on-demand consultant to the skills to system approach.
Yeah, disrupt yourself. That was what we told ourselves when we did this in our consulting role. Because if you don't disrupt yourself, somebody else will.
Yeah, from that aspect, apart from the skills to system in the strategic space, what do you think is the biggest space to be innovated within procurement?
I think the digitalization is still relevant across operational, tactical, and strategic, and there's room for innovation throughout. Different customers require different solutions. So large corporates, very often super fragmented in this dynamic world today. They divest a business unit, they buy 2 new business units. I think the biggest challenge is how quickly organizations change, and no IT solution can be configured at the speed the organization changes. And I think this is where innovation needs to take place to make the whole game much more adaptive through open interfaces, through more standards.
Very interesting. So on one side, the strategic aspect you outlined very detailed, and on the other side, to the ever-changing business environment, flexibility, adaptability, and therefore systems which can be implemented extremely fast and can be configured very customizable extremely fast.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to the initial part of the conversation when I was referring back to 20 years ago, when master data was stopping a process or broken processes was stopping a process, so you didn't get a purchase order out. This has been fixed. But then when organizational context changes and you divest a business unit and you buy 2 new business units, these 2 business units bring their own master data, they bring their own systems, they bring their own everything. So we're back at square one, but it cannot take us 3, 4, 5 years to fix it. It needs to be much, much faster. And I guess with the new technology that's out there, we're well prepared to have a much leaner and faster integration.
Yeah. So then I come to my last question for you. What's your vision for the future? Future, I mean, like maybe 5-10 years ahead. I mean, some people speak about autonomous procurement, that there might not be anymore a procurement team, but everything is done through AI, or maybe everything is focused on ESG and Scope 3 improvement. What's your kind of idea of the future?
Well, I was asked that question some 5 years ago. I was asked whether I could help digitalizing the Vodafone procurement company. And in my humble opinion, by then, the Vodafone procurement company was already fully digitalized. E-procurement, e-sourcing, e-invoicing, e-contracting, even a first very promising instance of process mining. So I was a little bit overwhelmed with the question, and I did my research and I couldn't find anything. The only thing that helped me back these days was a quote that I found by David Ben-Gurion. And this guy had said, all experts are experts in what was. There are no experts in what will be, which was great because it was a justification not to know anything. But the conclusion was even better. The conclusion was, if you want to be an expert in future topics, 3 things have to replace experience, namely vision, leadership, and collaboration. And I'm again overwhelmed with your question. So the only thing I can offer is that we find out together in the very spirit of vision, leadership, and collaboration.
No, I think that's a very great answer. No one can obviously predict the future, but with that toolkit, I think we can be better equipped to conquer the future. So I think that's a great closing statement. So thanks a lot for your time, Michael, and it was a true pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for having me. Great pleasure here as well. Thank you very much, Fabian.
This was the Procurement Unplugged podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. For more podcasts and expert content, visit us at procurementunplugged.com.